Face masks and all, President Xi of China tries to smooth frayed nerves in these images released by Chinese state media. The death toll from coronavirus continues to rise despite the unprecedented quarantine efforts. This cruise ship is docked in Japan, locked off from the outside world, with 23 Americans now infected.
Character is on the ballot. The character of this country's on the ballot.
And the candidates now sharpening their attacks just one day before voters head to the voting booth in the first-in-the-nation primary.
I don't have the biggest bank account in this race. I didn't have the biggest name ID going into this, but what I have is grit.
A new national poll just out appears to show the Sanders campaign gaining strength, but can Buttigieg surprise? We'll take you to New Hampshire. And the bird's eye view will show you the violent end of a prison riot, all captured on camera. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Welcome to ABC News Live Prime, and thanks so much for streaming with us. We have a lot of news to get to, but before we begin, for those who are just joining us for the very first time, we'd like to reiterate our goal here. First off, to those who have decided to cut out cable, you have not cut off your ability to access insightful news. Our aim is relatively simple: to provide analysis and context to both stories that inform and stories that make you feel. We hope to delve a little deeper and linger just a little bit longer on the news that matters. And with that, off to our big story. We are just hours away from voters in New Hampshire casting their ballots in the first-in-the-nation primary. After Friday night's debate, it's been an all-out sprint by the 2020 Democratic field to make their final pitch to voters in the critical contest. And after his surprise finish in Iowa today, Pete Buttigieg is sharpening his attacks on Senator Bernie Sanders, who won New Hampshire back in 2016. Sanders is hoping another first-place finish could help propel him to the nomination. Just look at the huge crowds. Take a look at that line for Sanders' events across the state. This was the scene. ABC's Mary Bruce has been tracking the candidates in New Hampshire and has the very latest.
Tonight, Bernie Sanders confident a win is in sight.
If we win here tomorrow, I think we got a path to victory for the Democratic nomination.
The senator from neighboring Vermont turning up the heat on two of his rivals.
One of the things that differentiates our campaign from other campaigns, my friend Mr. Buttigieg and my friend Joe Biden, they have dozens and dozens of billionaires contributing to their campaign.
Thanks for coming. Good. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Sanders well aware that Pete Buttigieg is riding a wave of momentum out of Iowa.
You mentioned Bernie Sanders and only Bernie Sanders. Do you see this as a two-person race now, and does that help you?
Well, I certainly think there's a very clear contrast between my approach and my friend Senator Sanders' approach. He's talking about either a revolution or a status quo, and there's nothing in between.
Buttigieg is also fending off attacks from Joe Biden in the fight for moderate voters.
This guy's not a Barack Obama.
Well, he's right. I'm not Barack Obama, and neither is he. Neither is anyone running for president right now. And this isn't 2008. It's 2020.
Is this Mickey Mouse on your hat, huh?
Biden has already predicted a poor showing in New Hampshire, but he's still trying to fight for every vote.
I'm Joe. Good to see you.
I know you're Joe.
Put me over, okay?
And so is Elizabeth Warren, who needs a strong finish here to move forward. Today, Warren trying to change minds at the Sweet Maple Cafe.
Still on the fence, so what are you going to say to change my mind?
Wow!
One campaign is seeing a new burst of energy.
So as you've probably heard, we're on a bit of a surge.
Full house. It's a good sign.
After her strong debate performance, Amy Klobuchar is drawing her largest numbers yet.
What is it going to take to translate and harness all of that enthusiasm into actual votes?
That is asking them to help me in these last 24 hours. I am the only candidate that went from the Rotary Club of Nashua, where I was asked to speak, to this rally. But I think that is how you build this big coalition.
Pulling out all the stops.
All the stops.
And Mary Bruce joins us now from a Sanders campaign rally in Durham, New Hampshire. So set the scene for us there, Mary. And how is this battle between Buttigieg and Sanders playing out?
Well,
Lindsay, you can certainly feel here tonight why it is that Bernie Sanders is leading here in New Hampshire. This is a massive rally. People are still filling in. His supporters have been waiting for hours outside in the cold. The line was stretching for blocks to get in. It feels a little bit more like a rock concert in here. And of course, this comes as we are seeing that intense matchup between Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg. They have been crisscrossing this state, lobbing fierce attacks at one another. I spoke with Pete Buttigieg earlier today. It seems he's trying to make this a two-person race, Lindsay.
Also, a new poll out today. It shows some warning signs for the Biden campaign. Explain a little bit about what it says and how his campaign is moving forward.
Well, remember, they, of course, have already conceded that they are likely facing another disappointing finish here in New Hampshire tomorrow. And then today we saw a new national polling that shows that Joe Biden is slipping. Bernie Sanders in the lead in this new Quinnipiac poll at 25%. Joe Biden down at 17%. And a surprise here, Michael Bloomberg now in third place at 15%. And, of course, Lindsay, he isn't even campaigning here in New Hampshire. Instead, he is building a huge organization and putting millions of dollars into other states. These numbers showing that strategy could be paying off.
All right, Mary Bruce, right from impeachment to the campaign trail. We appreciate it, Mary. Thank you. And, of course, the Democratic race is front and center, but President Trump is also making his presence felt in New Hampshire tonight, holding his first post-impeachment rally in Manchester. Take a look at him earlier this evening as he rallied his supporters with a new attack on Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
On Tuesday, I delivered my address on the State of the Union. And I had somebody behind me who was mumbling terribly, mumbling, wah, wah, ho, ha. He was mumbling. Very distracting. Very distracting. Very distracting. I'm speaking and a woman is mumbling terribly behind me, angry. There was a little anger back there. We're the ones should be angry, not them. We're the ones that should be angry. But we proudly declare that we are in the midst of the great American comeback. Our country is stronger today than ever before. The day after my address, our good Republicans in the United States Senate voted to reject the outrageous partisan impeachment hoax and to issue a full, complete, and absolute total acquittal.
ABC News Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl's at the president's rally and joins me now. Looks like a full house there right behind you. Just give us a sense of how enthused President Trump's base is, especially by his acquittal.
Lindsay, Trump supporters are as fired up as I have ever seen them. I mean, this rally is in an arena that I was at just 2 nights ago, Saturday night, at an event that included all of the major Democratic nominees, candidates for the Democratic nomination. And we have a bigger crowd here by far just for Donald Trump than we had on Saturday for all of the Democrats. Some of these people were waiting out line starting yesterday. And trust me, Manchester, New Hampshire, it is cold, it is rainy, snow on the ground. They're waiting more than 24 hours, some of them, to come here. So yes, Trump supporters are very energized. You've got the impeachment acquittal, good news on the economy, and Democrats coming out of Iowa seem to be in disarray. They feel like they're on the winning side. And also, by the way, Trump's approval rating has hit its highest level ever. But think about it, Lindsay, that approval rating is still, in the Gallup poll, 49%, less than half the country. So even at the high watermark, arguably for the Trump presidency, he has a tough battle ahead regardless of who the Democrats nominate.
And it looks like he's in full swing campaign mode at this point. What's the strategy there with going head-to-head with Democrats this early?
has embraced a big...
Well, you know, one part of the strategy is to try to pick off some states that they didn't win last time. New Hampshire, right here, is a state that he lost by a little over 2,700 votes. It was the closest loss they had, the closest margin for any of the other states. So they believe that they can turn around, pick off a state like this. They're also looking at Arizona, Minnesota, maybe even New Mexico. But it's an interesting thing to watch. They are clearly trying to appeal to suburban voters who have been badly alienated by Trump's rhetoric, by a number of issues. So he's trying to find a way to appeal to some of those voters. But at the same time, Trump's instinct coming out of this impeachment process is to have retribution, revenge for his enemies, exactly the kind of things that don't necessarily play well for those suburban voters that his campaign knows he's going to need to win re-election.
We can hear the boos and the applause behind you. Lots of enthusiasm and energy. John Carl, live for us in New Hampshire tonight. Thanks so much, John. Meanwhile, President Trump also weighed in on the coronavirus outbreak today. Trump said that he spoke to China's president, who told President Trump the virus will be gone by April due to the heat from the change in seasons. Disease specialists are hopeful, but they warn that the virus is new and difficult to predict. China has been largely criticized for downplaying or covering up the seriousness of the outbreak. And as we saw earlier, President Xi was seen in public today wearing a surgical mask, trying to calm fears. Meanwhile, there are 3,700 people, including nearly 24 Americans, trapped under quarantine on a cruise ship in China. The ship's captain today announced that the number of confirmed cases has doubled. We're going to go live to Maggie Rulli in Japan in just a moment, but first she has the latest on the desperate containment efforts.
These chilling new images now emerging on Chinese social media showing the drastic steps taken to try to stop the spread of that virus. Quarantine teams seen dragging a couple from their apartment after they reportedly refused to self-quarantine. And tonight, this self-described citizen journalist who has defied the Chinese government to report on shortages of masks and protective clothing hasn't been heard from in days. The virus has now sickened over 40,000 and killed 910 people, including the first American, a 60-year-old in Wuhan. Over the weekend, in just 24 hours, nearly 100 people died, the deadliest day yet. Overnight, the cases aboard that quarantine cruise ship off Japan doubling to 135. At least 23 of those infected are Americans, including Rebecca Frazier from Oregon, who is still hospitalized.
It doesn't even feel like a cold, to be perfectly honest. I wouldn't have known that there was anything wrong with me if they hadn't tested me.
Her husband tested negative, but is stuck on the ship for 8 more days, along with 3,700 others, as more passengers get sick.
It's just scary hearing the numbers increase.
Newlyweds Milena Basso and her husband Gaetano Cerullo fear they could be next.
It's just slowly creeping up, so it's making us think us being on here, are we just prone to this scenario to happen?
Despite the worries on board, the CDC says there's no evidence the virus can spread through the ship's ventilation system. Back in China today, President Xi Jinping making a rare visit to a health center in Beijing, wearing a mask, even getting his temperature taken. President Trump saying just 2 nights ago he had a long talk with the Chinese president.
I had a long talk with President Xi, for the people in this room, 2 nights ago, and he feels very confident. During the month of April, the heat, generally speaking, kills this kind of virus, so that would be a good thing. But we're in great shape in our country.
And Maggie Rulli joins us now live from Japan, where those passengers remain under quarantine. And Maggie, there's a concern that the close quarters could make this outbreak even worse.
Lindsay, exactly. They're trying to keep this a strict quarantine. You can see that ship behind me, but it's getting more and more difficult. As you said, 3,700 people on board that ship. It's practically become a living city. All those people still need to get 3 meals a day. They need some time above deck to get some sunlight. So making sure that people don't come into contact with other people that may be infected is a top priority. We even spoke with one couple that says they're refusing to go above deck. They don't want to talk to anyone. They don't want to risk getting this virus. They're also refusing to even let anyone come in to clean
their room. And it sort of speaks to the fear on board. We're talking to a lot of those passengers, this feeling of helplessness, of not knowing what's happening next. And Lindsay, just since we've been standing out here this morning, we've already seen multiple ambulances approach this cruise ship. We, again, don't know exactly why they're here, but often we've been seeing almost every day new cases reported. So it looks like we may see potentially new numbers today, and this cruise ship saga is far from over.
And give us a sense of what's next after the quarantine is over for the people on board this ship.
Well, that's sort of the big question. Everyone we speak to just keeps counting down the days. One man told us today is hump day. We're at day 7 of this 14-day quarantine. But there are questions about, what if I'm someone that came into contact with someone that now tested positive for the virus? Does that quarantine start over? And so far, the health ministry here in Japan has said that while it's 14 days, for most people, it could be extended if you've come into contact with that virus. So still a lot of questions. Now, Princess Cruises that owns this cruise ship, they've come out giving everyone on board a full refund. They're returning costs for airfare, any extra charges. And Lindsay, they're even offering a voucher for another cruise. Now, this one surprised me because, again, we asked a bunch of people on board, are you going to get back on a cruise ship after this quarantine? And Lindsay, so far, every single person we've asked has said yes. Yes, they're going to get on another cruise.
Actually, Maggie.
I know.
All right, Maggie Rulli for us live.
One couple, Lindsay, even says they're getting on a cruise in 2 weeks. I know.
I would think that they've had enough of being quarantined at a cruise ship, and now we're going there for pleasure. But, people surprise you. All right, Maggie, stay safe. Thank you. And joining us now live is one of those Americans who contracted the coronavirus aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship, Rebecca Frazier. She joins us now from her hospital room in Tokyo. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to do it.
I just understand that a nurse just left your room. How are you feeling, and what is that check-in process like?
Yeah, so I'm feeling good still. The check-in process, basically, they come by every few hours and take my temperature, blood pressure, pulse, check my lungs, that kind of thing. So, yeah, they just come in every once in a while for that.
What kind of symptoms have you been experiencing and treatments?
So symptoms, all I really had was a slight cough when I first got here, and I did have a slight temperature at that point. Both of those have normalized. I don't have a temperature anymore, and my cough is pretty much gone. And treatment, there is no treatment. All I'm doing is sitting here in isolation. There's no fluids. There's no cold medicines. Not that I would really need those, because honestly, I don't even have enough of anything. And so, yeah.
But wait, I don't understand. So you're not taking any kind of medication? At some point, the virus you just get over it, and it's just kind of like a cold or flu in that sense?
In that sense, from what I understand, yes. Yeah, there are no treatments here.
Okay, you seem to be very calm through all of this. Is there any reason then that are people overreacting, do you think?
I mean, there's, of course, a risk for those populations who would be at risk for any virus, elderly, children, those who haven't, been vaccinated and such. Because, I mean, I got my flu shot before I came here. I've had a pneumonia vaccine and all of that. So I feel pretty prepared for it. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of some hysteria might be a harsh word, but people are probably a little more worried than they really need to be. If you're, a healthy adult individual, there's no reason to think that you should experience any, symptoms beyond just, what might be a mild cold or flu.
Okay. Have you been given any idea of when you're going to be able to get back home to Oregon?
That information keeps changing. So especially to be able to get back home, that much we don't know. To be able to leave the hospital, it might be at any point next week, maybe like the 18th through the 21st. but that's essentially as much information as I know at this point.
All right, well, we certainly hope that you're going to be able to get back home, sleep in your own bed again very soon. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, yes, you're welcome. Happy to do it. Thank you.
Next to a shootout at a Walmart in Arkansas, where authorities say that a quick police response saved a lot of lives. It happened this morning in Forest City, 50 miles west of Memphis. Police were called to the scene after a man started threatening people. 2 officers were injured before taking the shooter down. The gunman did not survive. No shoppers were hurt. Tonight, the Pentagon is once again revising the number of injured service members from Iran's missile attack last month. The Department of Defense is now reporting 109 troops have been diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury after the Iranian attack on a U.S. base in Iraq. President Trump originally declared that no one was injured. Traumatic brain injuries can sometimes take time to identify. Tonight, Vanessa Bryant is opening up about her grief in the wake of her family's unimaginable loss. In an Instagram post late this afternoon, Bryant said, "My brain refuses to accept that both Kobe and Gigi are gone." Here's ABC's Kana Whitworth.
Tonight, Vanessa Bryant opening up about the death of her husband Kobe and their 13-year-old daughter Gianna. Posting this video on Instagram of a proud father coaching Gigi and her team. Vanessa writing, "It's like I'm trying to process Kobe being gone, but my body refuses to accept my Gigi will never come back to me. It feels wrong."
The same way he committed as a player, he's committing as a coach.
She adds, "Why should I be able to wake up another day when my baby girl isn't?" Kobe and Gianna killed with 7 others when the helicopter they were riding in crashed into the mountains near Calabasas. Kobe spoke about just what coaching meant to him in his last interview with the LA Times.
I think coaching young kids is the most important thing we can do. It's a great opportunity to not just prepare them for the game, but put them on the path to hopefully prepare them for life.
Our thanks to Kana. When we come back, they are calling it state-sponsored crime. The victim, nearly 145 million Americans, who the DOJ says is to blame for the massive hack on the credit agency Equifax. The police ambush caught on camera. New York City's mayor says it was an assassination attempt. The suspect stood before a judge today, his face badly beaten. And the debate, should famous American figures like Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King be only played by Black Americans? We'll be back in just a moment. Back now with a shocking update on the Equifax data breach that impacted nearly half of the country. It was one of the largest in American history. 145 million people impacted. According to the Department of Justice, the theft of personal names, birth dates, social security numbers, and addresses may have been a state-sponsored crime. Our Pierre Thomas has more on this troubling story.
Lizzie, the Justice Department is pointing the finger at the Chinese military for being responsible for this extraordinary breach which impacted so many Americans in such a personal way. Justice Department officials and the FBI accused 4 members of Chinese People's Liberation Army of hacking Equifax, charging them with economic espionage, wire fraud, and a number of conspiracies, including one involving computer fraud. According to U.S. authorities, beyond the privacy breach, the computer attack is part of a broad plan by China to steal intellectual property. In this case, they appeared to want to better understand how U.S. companies use artificial intelligence to manage information about millions of citizens. And authorities warned the stolen information could be used to target Americans, including high-ranking government officials. When you have so many people's social security numbers, addresses, dates of birth, there's an endless amount of problems that can be created, Lindsay.
All right, Pierre Thomas joins us now in D.C. Pierre, I'm trying to get an understanding of these suspects that are in China. What's the real chance that they'll be apprehended?
It's really low. China is not going to cooperate, and the FBI was pretty upfront by saying they don't have any real ability to arrest these suspects at the moment, and they've threatened that if the alleged hackers ever leave China, they will be grabbed, and they warned the U.S. has a long memory, Lindsay.
Pierre, it's extremely rare for U.S. law enforcement to name Chinese government officials in such an open way. Why now, with so much at stake with those huge ongoing trade negotiations with China?
Lizzie, even as the U.S. president tries to resolve these trade deals with China, U.S. law enforcement is trying to send a message. The FBI claims this is an epic battle to determine who will be the dominant economic superpower in the 21st century. And I don't think it's clear why the Chinese government wanted so much detailed information about so many Americans. That is what concerns everybody, Lindsay.
Pierre Thomas, thank you so much for your reporting. And let's turn now to Matt Katz, Associate Managing Editor for Digital Trends. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So how can we protect ourselves from these massive data breaches?
The number one thing to do is to immediately sign up for credit monitoring services. You can find them online fairly easily. Some are free, some are paid. I particularly like Credit Karma, and a lot of banks and credit card companies offer them as well. And what that basically does is it'll send you an alert anytime something suspicious happens with any of your personal information, from your social security number to a credit card number.
And give us a little bit of an explanation about the idea of a two-factor authentication. I mean, what if a scammer gets your phone number?
Nothing is perfect. Nothing is ever going to be 100% effective, but you want to make it as hard as possible for someone to hack your personal information. One of the best ways to do that is two-factor authentication, which is when, say, if you log into your email account, it sends you a text with a little code number for you to log in. There are ways around this, but it is particularly hard, and someone might just move on to an easier target if they can't get into your accounts right away.
Would freezing your credit report be at all helpful?
If you start to notice something suspicious, definitely contacting the big 3 credit bureaus and freezing your credit report should be maybe a first step if you think something is happening to your credit rating if your social security number has been compromised. One of the best ways to find out is to enable text alerts for any of those free credit monitoring services, so you find out the second they see something suspicious.
All right, Matt Katz, Associate Managing Editor for Digital Trends, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Some Illinois residents could expect a few $100s in their pockets just because they were automatically tagged in photos online. Now, Facebook settled a $550 million class action lawsuit filed by 3 people in Illinois. The suit alleged that the social media giant broke a state law that requires companies to get consent before using consumers' biometric data. Privacy law attorneys say this settlement could trigger an increase in the number of similar lawsuits against tech companies. And we are just getting started here at ABC News Live. Officers with shields, gas masks, and weapons storm into a New Mexico jail to stop a riot. We'll show you how it all ends. And the big night on the red carpet, the historic wins, and the message about why diversity matters in Hollywood and beyond when we come back.
you so much to the Academy and everybody out there that supported this film. There were lots of you. We share this award with you. There were so many filmmakers that worked so hard on this, and it was a labor of love. And it was because we have a firm belief that representation matters deeply. Especially in cartoons, because in cartoons, that's when we first see our movies, and it's how we shape our lives and think about how we see the world.
That was Karen Tolliver last night as the animated short film Hair Love took home an Oscar. The producers stressing the importance of representation and diversity in their film about an African-American father learning to style his daughter's natural hair. Diversity was also on display as Parasite made history by becoming the first non-English film to win Best Picture at the 92nd Academy Awards. And now let's take a look at the Oscars by the numbers. Our daily look at the numbers behind the news. We start with 4. That's the number of golden statues taken home last night by Bong Joon-ho, whose genre-bending comic thriller Parasite won him Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, Best International Film, and Best Picture. The huge night for the South Korean filmmaker ties him with Walt Disney for most Academy Awards taken home in one night. After 8 nominations for the Dern family, Laura Dern took home the family's first Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in Marriage Story. Dern gave an emotional thank you to her parents, Diane Ladd and Bruce Dern, who have 5 combined Oscar nominations in their illustrious careers going back to 1974. Laura Dern won on her 3rd nod. And Brad Pitt took home his 2nd Oscar and his first in an acting category for his role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Pitt had previously won as a producer for 12 Years a Slave back in 2014. Much more ahead on ABC News Live. A chilling new surveillance video of an ambush inside a New York City police station. Also, the debate sparking anger and division within the black community tonight. The question, who has a right to reparations? Our Steve Osinsami speaks with one of the founders of the controversial group ADOS. And here's a look at the trending stories on abcnews.com right now. We'll be right back.
The countdown is on for the first in the nation primary, and the candidates not wasting a minute.
Now it's decision time, and it's coming down to this.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders getting an early start, addressing a crowd of supporters at a breakfast in Manchester.
We don't go to rich people's homes and get advice from millionaires and billionaires who are raising all kinds of money. You are my donors.
We have a big thing tomorrow.
tomorrow. Senator Amy Klobuchar feeling a boost from Friday's debate, Biden shifting his criticism from Sanders and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg to President Trump.
Character is on the ballot. The character of this country's on the ballot.
Trump casting a shadow over the New Hampshire primary by hosting his own rally at the same arena Democrats filled just days ago.
Chinese President Xi out visiting a hospital, a community center, even having his own temperature taken. An effort to reassure the public, China instituting mandatory quarantines, a strategy President Trump supports, telling governors gathered to the White House President Xi assured him that warm weather will kill the virus.
The virus that we're talking about having to do, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
We have seen some concerning instances of onward transmission from people with no travel history to China.
New arrests from the massive Equifax breach in 2017, where hackers raked in sensitive information on Americans. Attorney General William Barr today announced Chinese military hackers are to blame.
Specifically 4 members of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The hackers obtained the names, birth dates, and social security numbers of nearly 150 million Americans and the driver's licenses of approximately at least 10 million Americans.
We had a tragic event that took place here in Forest City, Arkansas today.
A gunman is dead following a shootout at a Walmart in Forest City, about 90 miles from Little Rock.
It's scary.
Officers engaged the suspect. The suspect is deceased. 2 of our officers have been injured, but it's due to their heroism and quick response that no civilians were injured with that.
We're just learning that the ATF is also here on the scene responding to what's happening. There are employees in the back part of the parking lot here.
It's just not safe anymore.
Now, the new video coming in of a prison riot in New Mexico. Authorities near Albuquerque had to step in after 9 inmates would not go back to their cells. This happened last month, but we're just now seeing video of it. Officers even fired, you saw that right there, a flashbang to disorient the inmates. They then tried to throw furniture and soapy water back at them. Finally, authorities were able to cuff everyone and get them back to their cells. The suspect in a rampage the New York mayor called an assassination attempt, or officers appeared in a Bronx courthouse today. Surveillance video shows Robert Williams walk into 2 police stations and fire his weapon, injuring 1 officer. Williams now faces attempted murder charges. And tonight, that officer is out of the hospital and recovering. Here's ABC's Gio Benitez.
This is the chilling surveillance video. The gunman calmly walking into this Bronx police precinct on Sunday morning. Moments later, drawing his gun. An officer ducks for cover as gunfire rings out. The suspect runs into another room, emptying his entire clip, striking a lieutenant in the arm, then dropping to the ground, his gun flying across the floor. More than a dozen officers swarmed the suspect, one punching him repeatedly.
I will point out that this coward immediately laid down, but only after he ran out of bullets.
Saturday night, police say this surveillance video shows the same gunman approaching a police van, shooting 1 officer in the neck.
This was an attempt to assassinate police officers. We need to use that word.
Tonight, Robert Williams standing before a judge, his face beaten. Prosecutors say he confessed to both crimes and even threatened to do it again. Both officers are now out of the hospital. One of them, Jose Gautreau, was applauded as he stood up from his wheelchair.
All right, thanks to Gio for that. And next to the debate that is raising eyebrows and, according to some, stirring divisions and anger within the black community, the question, do black immigrants have the same experiences as black Americans who are the descendants of slaves? The debate reignited after Cynthia Erivo was named to play Harriet Tubman, a role that she later received an Oscar nomination for. The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slaves. Our Steve Osinsami met with its founder.
Here are the nominees for
When the names of the nominees for Best Actress were read last night at the Academy Awards, Cynthia Erivo was one of them.
Cynthia Erivo, Harriet.
Stand up, take my people with me.
She is only the 11th black actress ever nominated for an Oscar in a leading role, and had she won, would have become only the second black woman to win the award after Halle Berry in 2001. But in the community whose story she helped tell in this important film, there is a small and unfortunate cloud that has rained on her performance this entire award season, and it's a question of her blackness.
Harriet Tubman.
The title role of Harriet Tubman, a challenge for any actress, and Erivo rose to the occasion, paying tribute to the black abolitionist who freed hundreds of slaves and remains one of the most important figures in black American history.
God was watching, but my feet was my own, running, bleeding, climbing, nearly drowned, nothing to eat for days and days, man, I made it.
But when the film's producers first announced that it was Erivo getting the job, it didn't go over well with many black Americans because Erivo is British.
So there's people who took issue with you being from England?
From England and African.
While promoting the film on New York City radio, she took a moment to defend herself with WQHT host Ebro Darden.
Well, I think there's a misconception that when you're in the UK, you sort of get to bypass all the awful things that happen to you as a black person, but you don't.
On Twitter, the hashtags Boycott Harriet and Harriet Deserves Better found life.
You know, obviously there's been a lot of conversation about the fact that she's British, but it's so unfair.
The film's black producer addressed the controversy multiple times this award season, including at the Middleburg Film Festival in Virginia last October.
You live or die on the shoulders of the actor in the lead role. So she was it, period.
Online, a new group of black intellectuals found their voice with this debate.
If Harriet was part of your lived experience as an ADOS, you could bring it to that role.
They are the American descendants of slavery, or ADOS for short, and they argue that black Americans who are the children of African immigrants have it entirely different than African descendants of slaves. In Atlanta, we met one of the group's founders, Yvette Carnell.
Well, there's an expectation that Yvette is xenophobic and Yvette hates black immigrants, and that's just not the case.
She told us that she is ADOS, but says that I am not because my parents immigrated here from Nigeria.
I'm lighter than you. I'm far lighter than you. But like the cost that we bear is because of being brought here as slaves is very different.
We got very personal.
Just because you have melanin and kinky hair doesn't mean you have the same background and you are tied to that kind of systemic oppression in this country. So yes, you can come from Nigeria, you can come from Ghana. You're kind of the opposite of what we are, though. You're the elite where you come from. We're the bottom caste here. We just look alike.
It sounds like you're saying that the American part of African American is more important to African descendants of slaves.
I think it's essential because we built the richest country in the world. But we've always been very, very giving and very accepting of black immigrants in this country. We always have. But it's a problem when you look at the number of these roles, especially lead roles, which are going to other groups and other people, even though we fought for the opportunity to be in those roles. And we didn't get to school in London. Like, we didn't go from Nigeria to London to different background. You look at Cynthia Erivo, it's not the same as my background. I'm a bottom caste in this country. That's different than what you came from. And so we don't have access to the things and opportunities that we fought for.
They think something is deeply wrong when a British actor of Nigerian descent is chosen to play the role of Martin Luther King in Selma, and a British actress plays his wife, Coretta Scott King. They see similar issues with the leading roles in Best Picture winner 12 Years a Slave and the thriller Get Out, which also won an Oscar. Even the dean of black actors, Samuel L. Jackson, is taking sides in the debate. During this interview with New York's Hot 97, he points out that Get Out's Daniel Kaluuya is a Brit of Ugandan descent, and he wonders if a different actor should have played the role of a black American in an interracial relationship.
I tend to wonder, what would that movie have been with an American brother who really understands that in a way? Because, I mean, Daniel grew up in a country where, you know, they've been interracial dating for 100 years.
And they're not just upset with the movies. They say that black immigrants and their children are taking seats in American colleges and businesses that are meant for the descendants of slaves. And they don't seem to acknowledge that many black people in Europe, the Caribbean, and elsewhere can also trace their ancestors back to slavery. They point to this 2015 study that shows that black immigrants are more likely than African Americans to earn a better living, have college degrees, and live in two-parent households. ADOSs don't believe that these families should benefit from affirmative action.
It was never meant for white women. It was never meant for immigrants or just people of color. It was meant for us. Everybody else just kind of shoehorned their way in.
Wouldn't you say, though, that that is a big generalization?
No.
No?
No.
It doesn't feel like a big generalization that someone like who is the children of Liberian parents might be just as black.
Just as black, but what they went through was in Liberia.
I'm hard-pressed to believe that someone exactly my age, exactly my experience, who's lived in the same exact shoes that I've lived in over these past 49 years would have any different of an external experience as a black man in America.
Let me break it
than I
down
do.
for you. Let me break it down for you. That's the Obama argument, I like to call it. Obama said, when people see me as a black man, I have a problem getting a cab too. My life experience is the same.
Yeah.
Obama also went to a top-tier school, like it was a private school in Hawaii when he was there. What I'm saying to you is this. Being black, like not being able to get a cab, or the police seeing you and saying this is a black man, right? You can experience that, but the lineage and the cost of slavery is not in the eyes of a racist, right? So you can say it's the same, but it's not the same in terms of wealth level, is it? It's only the
By her definition, I tried to argue that our white photographer who was recording our interview was more black American than I.
So Jay, right here, this dude, he took one of those DNA tests.
He black.
Right? But the thing about it is, this is what's crazy is that by your definition, Jay is more black American than I am, right? Because I.
But see, here's the thing. He's not more black American because he didn't bear the cost, because he looks like Jay.
At the heart of this black agenda is the hope for reparations, the idea that America owes the descendants of slaves a certain dollar figure for the trauma of their history. Critics of the ADOS movement say it's pure discrimination, that the racism that black Americans experience from redlining to job discrimination happens to all, no matter how they got here.
We may have gotten dropped off at different points, but we still are the glue that comes from the diaspora. And when we start picking and choosing who has more blackness over the other, who has more entitlement over the diaspora than the other, I think that's when we get into a really dangerous narrative and conversation on our community. And so we have to be mindful that we keep focus on that it is color that is the heart of racism.
Cynthia Erivo, who's also a Tony winner, argues that her birthplace shouldn't make a difference in what stories she tells on film or stage. She says her job as an actress is to transcend these issues, even if her ancestors have never had to bear the cost or the pain of slavery.
Steve Osunsami joins us now live. Steve, I don't even know where to begin. I have so many questions here. I mean, it seems like a provocative conversation, but it's a divisive and a slippery slope. I mean, so at the end, really, is this all about reparations, or is this trying to establish a I've had it worse than you, a caste system kind of situation here?
I think it's part reparations. That's one of the goals. But the other thing is that this group argues that the current measures of success, that when you measure the progress that black Americans have had in this country, that when you include people like myself or people like Barack Obama or Senator Kamala Harris, that when you include those people in the sort of analysis of progress, that you're not getting a real picture of what's happening to the descendants of slaves in this country.
But to your point, and I was so glad that you brought this up with her, you said that we're still subject to the same discrimination. So whether or not you're a descendant of slaves, like Barack Obama, for example, he still has a difficult time getting a cab. So I guess I'm still struggling to understand the point.
You know, When I walk into a room 10 people who are looking at me don't realize that I'm from Nigeria, that my parents are from Nigeria. They see a black man in America. And that experience is the same whether you are born in this country or the descendants of slaves or your parents are immigrants from Nigeria. One thing I will, though, admit and give to this argument is growing up in an African family, I had a language, I had food, I had clothing that belongs to my people and a community that I was raised with that does give me and did give me somewhat of an advantage over the African descendants of slaves who were born in this country.
Sure. I mean, everybody in all walks of life, in every aspect, has advantages and disadvantages. It's a really interesting conversation that would take much more time than we have allotted for it right now. But I really appreciate you, Steve, for bringing this conversation to us. So thank you.
With pleasure.
And let's turn now to Shireen Mitchell, founder of Stop Online Violence Against Women. Shireen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So give us a sense in your estimation of how ADOS is working to, it's my understanding that you believe, try to divide the black community.
Yes, I mean, there are key issues that the black community has, and that is about, we were slaves here. But if you're having an argument about where the slave ship dropped us off in different points as if we are not connected to each other, then we are having a different conversation. And that's part of what I think is this debate. The slave ship dropped off in, Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and other places, but that does not mean that we're not connected to the same aspect of slavery.
Critics have raised concerns about the idea of sowing division. What are their issues?
So in America, we're having this argument over what is closer to, like, unless you're born here, that you don't, which is really unfortunate. But there's a conversation about nativism. So if you weren't born in America, somehow that you are not black enough or not native enough to be an American. And we've gone through this historically in different ways across the spectrum, which happened in the civil rights movement. But, like, honestly, the argument between being called Negroes versus being called African American versus being called black, which is where we are now, is what this debate is about. And the truth is, those who were born here, those who come here, also have the same stigmas that they have to face.
Yeah, in the long run, I mean, I think the struggle is real, no matter where you're coming from, how you got here. Again, a longer conversation that I'd like to have probably off camera at some point. But thank you very much again for your time, Shireen Mitchell.
No, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate it, because I know you've been trying to hold the line about the way in which that we're having this conversation about race in this country and also how it affects the vote. And I'm hoping that we have a broader conversation about the way in which this impacts voter suppression and digital voter suppression, because this is a target on the way we vote in this country.
Certainly, voter suppression, big issue as well. Thank you again. And we will be right back with the future phenom and his remarkable discovery. Stay with us. Finally, this hour, we are launching our new series spotlighting young people who are sure to change the world. It is called Future Phenom, where we'll meet some incredible young minds who might make you feel just a little bit like a slacker. So now meet the high school student with his eyes to the sky who just made a remarkable discovery. His name is Wolf.
Well, this is cool, but the name Wolf is even cooler.
But with all of a sudden stardom,
what I discovered was a planet.
Many simply know him now as Planet Kid.
So the method I was using to find planets is called the transit method.
Wolf CUKIER, not quite a rocket scientist, but already rocking the science world after a massive discovery he made during an internship at NASA.
I was just to look through some preliminary data, and the planet just happened to be in like that first day of searching through targets, and just got lucky that it happened so quick. This is the greenhouse.
It happened at this very desk.
I had a monitor here and a laptop here.
This 17-year-old high school senior saw this piece of data about what was believed to be just another star. And so, was it already labeled TOI 1338?
Not at that point. At that point, it was TIC 260128333.
That was the star's name until this rising star came to a different conclusion. His hypothesis that he'd just discovered a planet.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Wolf's mentor, Dr. Veselin Kostov, showed him how to search for planets by examining tiny dips in light called transits.
Just to give an example, like for the past week, I myself have gone through like tens of thousands of light curves. Nothing. But this is a numbers game.
And just 3 days into his internship,
he looked at the right time at the right place.
Wolf noticed a peculiar pattern.
When I saw a decrease in the amount of light reaching our telescope from TOI 1338, that indicated that there was a planet or something else there.
What was your immediate response?
Once I identified something that looked cool, I put it in my spreadsheet, brought it to my mentor, and once my mentor got back to me that this looks good, that this might actually be something, I called my mom.
And what did he say to you?
Oh, we were on the phone for like about 2 hours that night.
5 months later, along with the work of dozens of researchers, his discovery is about to officially be confirmed a planet. Nearly 7 times the size of Earth and about 1,300 light years away, the planet orbits around 2 stars instead of 1, making it a circumbinary planet. Unlike Earth, sunsets there might resemble something like this from Star Wars. And while Wolf doesn't get to name the planet, his brother has already been brainstorming.
My brother's idea is Wolftopia.
Now, after that out-of-this-world discovery, Wolf is launching a new project in search of gold.
I have a vehicle that needs to go as fast as possible, 8.5 meters, and then stop as accurately and precisely as possible sometime after that.
At the State Science Olympiad. Good luck to Wolf. That is our show for tonight. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us.